It's time for the Phil Ferguson Show.
Well, hello there. Welcome to the Phil Ferguson Show. My name, not surprisingly, I guess, is Phil Ferguson. And this is my little podcast where I talk about investments, religion / atheism, politics, all the things you should not discuss with your family as a general rule if you want to keep peace in the household. It is late summer in 2022, and it is freaking hot and humid in the Chicagoland area. Yesterday, we went to see a Cubs game, and the temperature wasn't particularly high, but it was 100% humidity. And if you thought the humidity was going to break, then it would drizzle or rain on you for 5 minutes and then stop and then rain again. So it was like tropical weather watching a baseball game. I probably sweat out 5 pounds. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I drank a lot of water to get the water back, so I didn't really lose any weight. But interesting thing, baseball. Watched a game I did. Wow. I know people love it. I'm not a sports ball person. It was kind of 3 hours of sitting there and trying to give the impression that I was engaged with the activities going on in the field. And I probably failed pretty miserably, but it was nice to go, had family there, so absolutely fantastic company and delighted I went, but I could think of things that I would choose to do, but it's not always about me as much as I might think it should be. Today's show, we're going to have a quick interview with Danial Duncan. He is running for office in South Carolina. We want to hear a little bit about his story and what he's doing and maybe what you can do too. It is very important for people with a secular, humanistic, rational worldview to run for an office. I don't care if it's dog catcher on your public school board, your county board, city council, whatever it is, run for something. And the reason that I'm talking about these entry-level places is because that's where one starts. You generally don't wake up one day and say, I want to be a U.S. Senator. You want to run for something. And I don't expect the vast majority of you to do anything other than have an office or two over the few years. So do something that is within your scope, within the amount of effort you want to put into it, within the amount of responsibility that you want to take on, within the amount of time that you need to spend and the amount of money you might need to spend to participate in our political system. Some of you might find it quite enjoyable and then want to go on to higher and higher posts. And this is something that I think the Republican Party has done a better job of than the Democratic Party over the last couple of decades, perhaps, which is part of the problem of how they can win elections, even though they clearly represent minority opinions in the United States. Of course, there's problems with campaign finance, agreed. There's problems with gerrymandering, agreed. But some of that stuff is fixed at local and or state levels. So your participation and or a small percentage of you going to those higher levels can get in and do that work. If you don't want to run, if you don't think you're electable, find someone who is. Donate some time, donate some money. I don't think I overstated too much that we are on the precipice of losing the republic or losing democracy. So get involved if you can. Find a way. So we're going to talk to Danial about that. Of course, we're continuing the ongoing series of the Polaris Plan. Today's segment is Polaris Plan Part 4. A very quick recap of what was discussed in Parts 1, 2, and 3. If you have not heard those from the previous 3 episodes of this podcast, I do recommend that you go back and listen to 1, 2, and 3 in order to prepare yourself for part 4. Part 5 and 6 will follow in hopefully the next few weeks, and we'll wrap up the Polaris Plan review for 2022. And at the end of the show, brief closing thoughts and some remarks and comments about things that are going on in my life. And, the show's already going to be nice and long, so I'm going to wrap up this introduction part. We take a quick break, and we'll talk to Danial Duncan.
You're listening to The Phil Ferguson Show.
Hey, poor! You don't have to be poor anymore! Jesus is here!
Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to invite on an interview a personal friend of mine, Danial Duncan, and he is running for a public office, and he's going to tell us a little bit about that adventure. Danial, how are you today, sir?
I'm very happy to be here, Phil. It's good to talk to you again. I haven't got to talk to you since mid-April, and I'm excited to tell you about the race that I'm running for. I'm trying to unseat a right-wing incumbent for South Carolina House District 14 in Lawrence County, South Carolina. It's a very rural district. I'm only the third Democratic challenger for the seat in this millennium. But we've got a really unique opportunity with our new district map and the specifics about my incumbent. And I'm excited to tell your listeners what's going on here.
Sure. Now, you said it's South Carolina. Did I hear that right? House District?
Yeah.
Now, I'm an idiot, so forgive me. Is that a House District for the U.S. House or the South Carolina House?
It's for the South Carolina State House. Unfortunately, we didn't have anybody willing to challenge our U.S. Congressman Jeff Duncan. No relation.
Because, of course, you're Danial Duncan. Before we even get into the details of where you might stand and where the right-wing person might stand, and not that that's not enough, where can people support you?
The easiest place to find me is DuncanForSC.com or at DuncanForSC on Twitter. That's spelled out. It's not the letter 4. Number 4.
Number 4.
4 is not a letter.
So Duncan for SC.
Correct.
Excellent. So tell us why you instead of the other person.
So Stuart Jones, our incumbent, is a Ron Paul endorsed right-wing libertarian ideologue who is more interested in pulling political stunts than he is actually governing. So he likes to introduce these nonsense bills like making foreign gold coins legal tender in South Carolina, introducing constitutional carry without a permit for anyone to open carry a firearm, banning masks in schools. And the biggest fiasco that's happening right now is that in addition to all of these antics, he voted against the state budget that his own party put together. And to punish him, they allegedly pulled out all of his earmarks for Lawrence County and the city of Lawrence, to where we lost funding for railroad crossings, sewer lines, broadband cables, and a city park, and who knows what all else.
Wow, that seems less than fair, but clearly he's not being productive and useful to the local residents.
Exactly. And it angered even the local Republican Party so much that one of their Republican members of the Lawrence City Council publicly shamed this guy before his primary, trying to get him out of the race entirely. And the guy ended up having to spend $16,000 just to get 2,200 votes to win his primary, even though he had 2 opponents. So while he's raised a lot of money, it gives me an indication of how big his support actually is.
Yeah, fair enough. Now, again, this is South Carolina, House District 14. Just for my listeners, in case I have someone in South Carolina that doesn't know where District 14 is, because I wouldn't know where any Illinois districts are, What cities might this include, or what parts of cities?
The only thing that can actually be called a city is Lawrence. And then we've got small towns like Gray Court, Waterloo, Cross Hill, Mountville, Hickory Tavern, which is where I'm about to go canvassing, and then a little sliver of the city of Clinton.
Okay. And of course, as far as funding goes, someone, if they want to kick in $1,000 or $3,000, is there a limit that someone could contribute?
There is a limit of $1,000 per individual contributions for this race, and I've been trying to be very careful about making sure I follow all the ethics rules. There's a lot of dark money in politics, but I'm a first-time candidate. I never even had any political ambitions, and so I'm trying to make sure that I don't fall afoul of anything. I can't afford any fines or to go to jail.
Yeah. So you're just seeing that things are going poorly, and you thought, hey, I can do better than this guy, which, of course, I think you can. I know you think you can. So people can donate up to $1,000. And again, tell us where they go to do that. Yes, I know we're repeating ourselves, but I want to make sure that anyone that's interested has a chance to do this.
Yeah, DuncanForSC.com. There's a donate button to go to my Act Blue site, and that will take you right there. Or they can mail a check. My address is at the bottom of the website. I try to be very open and available to people. I've even got my cell phone number if anybody wants to ask me questions directly. But to tell your listeners a little bit about me and why I'm better than Stewart, I actually represent the working people of South Carolina. I'm a truck driver by trade, but a decade ago I was running the only Waffle House in this district for 4 years. And I've cooked breakfast for just about everybody. And for the entire 16 years I've worked in South Carolina, I've worked 60 hours a week, had to spend a lot of time away from my family, and still struggled to pay my bills. I don't think there's any representatives in the State House that know what it's like to miss a power bill or only be able to afford used tires whenever we hit one of our notorious potholes. You've been to South Carolina going to Reason Con and other conventions down here. You know what our roads are like.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're looking for a little bit of common sense, working for the working man, the working woman, the working person. You ran a Waffle House. I mean, that in South Carolina is shouldn't that be just all you need? You just say that, and they're gonna know you're a good guy.
You would think so, and more importantly, for that and for our district, I know I'm going to have to represent a lot of Republicans. And working at Waffle House, you have to get along with people that you disagree with, and some that you flat out don't like, just to get the job done. I had employees that I could not stand to be around, but we had to smile at each other and get through the shift every day. So it's something that I'm used to, and it's a way that I can take that experience, not only of working with other people, but of having a lot of customer service background, to be able to talk to people on the opposite side of the aisle and make sure we get this funding back that we've lost.
Yeah, that sounds like a nice skill, to be able to work well with others. I don't know that I can always do that, but I'm delighted that you can do that. I'm delighted that you're running for this office. Is there anything else we should know about the election? When is the election, and who can vote? I'm assuming you have to live in District 14, but when is it?
It's going to be the November 8th election. I was the only Democrat willing to stand up in Lawrence County for a race, so I did not have to worry about a primary challenger, which was great. It gave me a lot of time to build up my capacity and learn what I needed to do and gather the tools to be able to win this race. So I've been spending my time at work in between loads with the truck, calling voters every day, calling donors now that I've realized how far behind I am in fundraising, and I spend my weekends going out knocking on doors or setting up a table at the flea market, trying to meet people where they're at.
Yeah, and of course, you are at a disadvantage, but I think it's a noble pursuit. You're just an average guy. You don't have a machine. You don't have a system, big system to make money and hit up big corporate donors where your opponent might. I don't know the guy, but I'm assuming that. And so you sound like a much better representative for the average person in your district. Does that seem fair?
Yeah, absolutely. And I see that whenever I talk to voters directly, because I'll lead off and tell them I'm a Democrat. That way I get to see their face fall.
Yeah.
Because they don't have Democrats running in this area ever. And so they don't think I'll be able to win. And then I roll through and I tell them, I'm somebody who knows what it's like to spend all my time away from my family at work, struggle to pay my bills, and still miss a power bill from time to time. And I tell them about how I saw my dad lose his entire life savings whenever he had a disabling pre-existing condition before the ACA was put into law.
Yeah.
He had almost $500,000 in Walmart stock in 2005, and by 2007, he was almost destitute.
Yeah, that's not nice, man. I'm so sorry to hear that.
Yeah, luckily he's still hanging out and able to carry on, but those kind of stories tell people that I'm coming from the same background they are. I know what it's like to struggle, and I'm going to be able to pass that information on to the business owners and the lawyers and the trust fund crypto miners like my opponent. And I know crypto is a big bug in your bonnet following your Facebook. And
really?
Yep. And I cannot stand the fact that we have somebody like that trying to represent people who are just trying to work an honest day's job.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, Danial Duncan, again, you're a candidate for South Carolina House District 14. And tell us one more time where they can go donate some money.
Yeah, go to duncanforsc.com. Find me Duncan for SC on Twitter, and secure.com or actblue.com/donate/Danial-Duncan-1.
Okay, well, that's a long one, but is there anything we haven't covered that you want to get in before we get you back to canvassing?
Yeah, honestly, I cannot think of anything that just jumps out at me. I just really appreciate the fact that you were willing to give me some of your time and share my story with your listeners. Oh, no, there is one more thing.
Yeah, talk to me.
Yeah, so I think your listeners care about return on investment. And one of the things about investing in a smaller race, like for a state house candidate or a city council or a county council, is that if they support those local candidates who are on the ground going out talking to people directly, that's going to drive out voters that may not have normally showed up for the November elections. And then we have more people at the polls voting for things like governor, senator, secretary of education, secretary of state. It's how Stacey Abrams won Georgia over.
Yeah.
And it's what we need to do in South Carolina. Unfortunately, we've got so many U.S. Congress districts that go unchallenged. But if you look inside of those districts, like Jeff Duncan's district, you'll find 5, 6, 7 candidates who are running for a local office like mine, and they're going out and firing up their local Democrats so that they will actually show up in November. And I'm hoping that we can pull off, I don't want to say a miracle, but
not on this show,
you don't. We can pull off something spectacular in South Carolina this year.
I like that, spectacular. Well, Danial Duncan, thank you so much for coming on the Phil Ferguson Show and letting us know about how you're trying to make a difference. And I appreciate your time very much, and we wish you the best in your election, in your victory in November.
I don't think you have to be a religious person to have good values. So The way I see this is I'm going to start where you started, and that is I believe everyone should be treated with respect. As I said, for me, it is a basic value. Every human being has value, and that means every human being should be treated with respect. And that's true whether we're talking about black or white, straight or gay or trans, whether we're talking about old or young. I think this is really an important part of who we are. And if I can, let me just pick up one, although you mentioned several, but I think maybe it may be the one, since you mentioned it first, is the question about abortion. I understand that you and I may have differences. There may be a lot of different views in this room. But here's what I'm certain about, and that is a woman who's in the position of trying to decide what she's going to do about a pregnancy that she may not have planned for, may not have hoped for, may have been forced upon her, is a woman who should be able to call on anyone for help. She should be able to call on her partner. She should be able to call on her mom. She should be able to call on her priest or her rabbi or her pastor. But the one entity that should not be in the center of that very hard decision is the federal government. That's how I see it.
The Phil Ferguson Show is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Nothing said on the show should be interpreted as personalized investment advice. Investments should be based on your personal situation, and you, of course, should consult with your financial advisor or tax professional before taking any actions.
You're listening to The Phil Ferguson Show.
This is part 4 out of, I think, 5, 6 parts. The detailed, comprehensive review of the Polaris Plan. And of course, since this is part 4, we've already done part 1, 2, and 3. If you have not heard those, you may want to go back a couple of episodes and listen to parts 1, 2, and 3. Of course, we have already covered the 4 books that I recommend. Again, in the earlier parts, I'm not going to completely rehash all of that. And a really important idea is the long-term buy and hold in general is a foundational aspect of this, but also making some adjustments through time. The primary adjustment is stocks versus bonds in my world. What portion of your portfolio should be bonds versus stocks? And again, discussed in earlier parts to this 6-part review. When you are getting closer to retirement, more bonds. That makes sense, right? I hope. We've recently talked about which types of bonds and some specific bond funds that I think are good ideas. You can get similar funds. It's the concepts are important. While I do give very precise details on which funds that I often use, you don't have to use those funds. You have to follow the ideas. And of course, reading those 4 books can be very, very helpful for you to understand the foundation underneath these ideas. But of course, one of the other ideas is when the stock market's really hot, and this is difficult to do, but if the stock market makes 20 or 30% in a calendar year, which, by the way, 10% of all calendar years, the stock market makes 32% or more. The average is 10. The average is 8, 9, 10, something like that, 11, depending on how you calculate it and when you start and when you end. Normal years, cool. They're great. That's a lot of money to make. But when you make really huge money, especially if you're getting closer to retirement, then you can pull a little money towards the cushion if you're building the cushion. If you're 25 years old, you're just getting started, keep piling in more money. Don't worry about it. But so things are, buy and hold long term, but there's also some adjustments. And I think this is a fine line. I'm not doing any market timing, but I'm doing adjustments. I hope that makes sense, but long-term adjustments. And one of those adjustments is how much should you have in the cushion or bonds versus stocks. And again, if you're younger and farther from retirement, you make no adjustment, you just stick with stocks. Another adjustment on a grand scale is when you're looking at stocks is what portion should be in the United States versus the rest of the world. Of course, this is a U.S. citizen-based centric idea, I guess, and doesn't necessarily apply if you live in another country. If you live in another country, you have to evaluate what is the value of your economy. What percent of your money should you have in your specific economy? If you're not planning on leaving your country when you retire, which is probably most people, you should have a generous chunk of your money in your own home economy. What should that percentage be? I really don't know. And it's probably going to vary a lot depending on country to country. So you might want to have money in your country, money in the United States, money in everything else that's not your country and the United States. I don't have a general opinion on how that should mix. So my apologies. But for people in the United States, it is a really important factor in my model over many, many years to consider what percent should be domestic in the United States and what percentage of your stocks should be international. A quick note, although there is no legal requirements, a industry convention for mutual funds in the United States, if they say it is a global fund, that means that that fund generally invests in the entire globe, including the United States. So be careful that you understand what you are buying. If you buy an international fund, generally speaking, within the United States, an international stock fund or an international bond fund will have investments of the entire world, excluding, not including, without stocks from the United States. So be careful if you are, let's say you're putting 70% in the United States and 30% in international, and the international fund that you buy, whether it's called global, which would likely have the United States, or international, which would likely not have the United States, double check. Go to someplace like Morningstar.com and look at the holdings. If the thing that you're buying for your international portion, and for me, again, that excludes the United States, if the thing that you're buying there is half U.S. and half not U.S., you don't have 30% international, you now have 15% international. And you don't have that granularity where your international investments are distinct from your United States investments, which I want. And of course, without the granularity, of course, you cannot have the clarity because you can't see within the fund. I mean, you can get a snapshot at Morningstar.com, but you can't go in and tweak the holdings between domestic and international. So when I recommend international funds, probably the next episode, next segment, you want to make sure that you get specific international funds. Now, what portion of your portfolio should be international? This is a hotly debated topic in the industry, and different people have very different opinions. I'm going to, of course, present mine and maybe some other thoughts. You can do whatever the fuck you want to do. Just have a plan and have a reason for doing what you are doing. I will tell you, based on long-term historical norms, as shocking as it may sound to a younger investor, because this has not been the case for the last 10 to 14 years, international stocks generally return the same percentage within a point or two as the United States stock market does. So if you have a long-term expectation of the United States stock market making 9 to 11% per year, international will make approximately the same thing, 9 to 11% per year. Sometimes the United States market is up a lot and international collectively is not. Sometimes the United States market goes up and international stocks go down. Sometimes the reverse is true. Sometimes the U.S. market goes up 20% and the international total market goes up 20%. It's the exact same. But because they don't always go in lockstep, what you have is an asset international stock investments that are generally considered riskier, and risk is a mathematical measurement of volatility. I'm not going to go into the mathematical details, although that is great fun if you're into that kind of thing. But let's say on an average year, the U.S. stock market goes up 10%, plus or minus 5% to one standard deviation. That's not the actual number. I didn't look up the actual number. This is just for discussion purposes. So United States market on an average year, which never exists, makes 10% plus or minus 5%. One standard deviation. That means 2/3 of the time, the return is going to be between 5 and 15%. Assuming that's true, not actual numbers. International, for example, might be an annual return of 10% plus or minus 6%, one standard deviation, which means it would be between 4 and 16, whereas the U.S. stock market was between 5 and 15. So the variance, the magnitude of the up and down for international is generally bigger. So you have increased volatility. That is often spoken of as increased risk. Again, as if you're a long-term investor, a lot of that goes away. Another thing, generally, historically speaking, combining two high-risk assets that are not 100% correlated can reduce the overall volatility, aka risk, of your portfolio. It's kind of a weird and spooky magical thing, but it often holds to be true. So then the next question for me is, what percentage of your stock should be international versus domestic for the purpose of reducing volatility? Not for increased gains, but for reducing volatility. That number is about 20 to 30% international. If you push way over 50% to international, you have more volatility than you would if you were balanced in international and domestic in the United States. If you push to only domestic United States and have no international, that will be more volatile than a mixed or blended portfolio of domestic and international index funds. So that's kind of fun. So both portfolios, both types of investment, domestic stocks and international stocks collectively as a group, generally return about, give or take, over time, theoretically, based on past performance, which does not prove anything in the future, is about 10%, and you can reduce volatility by having a mix. So without any other knowledge, without any other information, just looking at volatility, 20 to 30% international for your stock portfolio seems like a good starting point. Another way to look at it, and I know Vanguard looks at it this way, so if you use Vanguard service or some other services, they might say, well, international accounts for 1/2 of the total global economy. If the United States is 1/2 and everything else in the world is 1/2, you should go 50-50. I think that's overdoing it, but who the fuck am I? I'm just a guy. I got my thoughts. Someone else has their thoughts. They might be more right. They might be less right. Whatever. I also look at how international has done recently in the short term, and you must keep in mind, and hopefully you've heard the other 3 segments, for me, short term might be 3 to 5 years. Short term is not next hour for me. I don't do any of that stuff. Sometimes someone will call me and say, Phil, did you see what the market did today? Nope. I didn't see it. I don't care. Don't give a shit. I have a long-term plan. I want you to have a long-term plan. Your plan can adjust, but you really should use it as a empirical, is that logical, a foundation? Because I want you to look at the plan. And again, you can modify the plan somewhat over time. And maybe that's even a good idea. But when you get an idea and you go, oh, I should put 20% of my money in this thing. Was that part of your plan a year ago? No. Well, if it wasn't in your fucking plan a year ago, who are you to change your plan? You better have a really good reason to change your entire long-term investing plan. It prevents you from doing emotional things. I was going to say stupid things, but it might not be stupid. It might work out for you. But it's that emotional thing when people a lot of times come to me and they want to make big money really fast because of the fantasy of picking a handful of stocks that are going to beat the market. That is very, very hard to do. It's like picking the winning numbers at a roulette wheel. Is that where you pick numbers? Yeah, you could put your chips on different numbers. In a casino, the sad thing is that the game is stacked against you. So every time you bet $1, you're going to win 95 or 92 cents. In the investing world, in stocks anyway, every year you invest $1, you're going to get $1.10 back, which is kind of fucking cool if you can keep your expenses and taxes under control. So when people talk about stocks being like gambling, kinda in the way that you might make money or you might lose money, but the odds are in your favor in investing, and the odds are not in your favor in gambling, but yet some people will say that investing is too risky and they'd rather gamble. But whatever. So again, on the idea that we're generally buy and hold, we're doing long-term investing, you're creating a plan that is adjustable. I don't know what's the right analogy. You can tell me what your thoughts are. Of course, you can email me with questions at phil@polarisfinancialplanning.com. I see investing a bit like a scale, where you're measuring the mass of something, not the weight, that's a different measure, but a scale, teeter-totter, want to keep it kindergarten level, teeter-totter, pendulum, like under a clock, swinging back and forth. Sometimes international stocks do better than domestic stocks. Sometimes they do worse. And the question is, when? When does that happen? When does international do better than the United States? Who the fuck knows? Sometimes it's for years and years in a row. And so one of the things that I look at is my confidence in the U.S. market versus international markets, and the strength of the dollar, honestly, is something. So I'm starting with 20-30% as an example. Back in the 90s, because I've been doing this that long, when .com was crazy, I increased every year 2 or 3% how much I had in international investments because it seemed like the U.S. was just getting crazy. I got to probably over 35% international. And so when everything went down in 2000, 2001, I shifted more towards domestic because I was more optimistic that the international might come back, or domestic U.S. might come back stronger, quicker, faster than international. And then again in 2008 with the housing crisis, the big market drop there where in 1 year, 2008, the U.S. market went down 37%. Now, if you want to pick a peak in 2007 and pick the bottom in 2009, you could argue, reasonably so, that the market went down 50%. But now, why did you pick those dates? Did you pick those dates to create an incredibly bad number? One of the reasons I try to stick to annual numbers is so that I'm not cherry picking starting and ending dates to make something look worse or better than it actually is. But after 2008, I was confident that the U.S. stock market had gone down too far, that it was an overreaction. Well, at least it was an overreaction once things got stabilized. And that actually was a wonderful place where it's a great example of government intervention fixing things. Now, did they fuck up a lot of the fix? Yeah, they sure did. I honestly think they should have taken that moment to break up the big banks, but in reality, we had increased consolidation. That's another segment for a different time. But in 2008, beginning 2009, I thought the opportunity for the U.S. stock market to bounce back, to do better than international, was favorable. And so I cranked down the percentage of the stock portfolio that was international and actually went to below 10%. The following years, when the United States stock market did really, really well, making 10, 12, 15% per year, the international stock market often languished and made next to nothing, 1 or 2% per year. And every year that the U.S. stock market outperformed and every year that the international stock market underperformed, I became more interested in holding a larger percentage of the stock portfolio in international stocks. And this is that pendulum swinging, the teeter-totter effect that really freaks people out, because the two things that I often do and or recommend that get the most pushback from investors is if I say something like, this year, give or take, during the year, whenever it can happen, and I can't even remember who came up with this, if your portfolio mix is 85% US and 15% international, and I say, over the next year, let's drift towards 20%. And someone else came up with that word, and I've stolen it. Thank you, whoever that was. My apologies for not remembering your name. But whoever came up with that drift, it's very important, because if your portfolio is mostly in taxable accounts, I don't want you doing anything dramatic that's going to create a big tax bill, unless you have a reason to create a big tax bill. Another segment for that. But you might want to drift towards a higher percentage in international. How does one drift there, you might ask? Great question. Well, during the year, your portfolio might have 2, maybe 3% in dividends. Well, if you take that entire 2 or 3%, and if you have a portfolio of stocks and bonds, and you take that 2 or 3% and put it into international, well, you've moved closer to from 15% to 20% in international stocks, because that's what you bought. If you are in the position where you're adding money, you can buy the investments that are international. If you're taking out money, you could take out from either the bonds or the U.S. stocks, depending on how they do. And so you can make these gradual adjustments. It might be that you have, like a lot of people, a blend of investments that are some in taxable accounts and some in non-taxable, or at least tax delayed, often called qualified accounts. And so they're qualified for special tax treatment. That's the two main categories, by the way. When you open an investment account or an account to do investments within, the first big break you've got to understand is the account you're opening, is the account type you're going to use qualified or non-qualified. And it's stupid language, and it's confusing as fuck. It makes sense from an industry perspective, but if you're new to all of it, it's confusing as hell. But the basic gist is, there used to be accounts in the 50s, in the 60s, 100 years ago, whatever. And when you made money, you sold things, you got paid dividends, you paid taxes. Easy to understand. Brokerage account, taxable account, individual account, joint tenants account, whatever. All kinds of different types of accounts. Then in the 1970s, we started with an IRA. And then we have Roth IRAs, 401ks, SEP IRAs, simple IRAs, another dozen types of accounts that are called qualified. They are now qualified for special tax treatment. So there's non-qualified, aka taxable, qualified for some kind of special tax treatment where taxes are at least delayed and possibly avoided, at least for a long period of time. Anyway, an aside, but if you have some of your portfolio in qualified accounts, 401k at work, an IRA, a Roth IRA, maybe you can make some of your adjustments in there right away. So if you decide you want to go from 15 to 20% international, if you have half or bulk of your money in qualified accounts, you can make those adjustments right away and snap to it. Otherwise, you might have to drift towards the new allocation that you want, that you've changed in your model. And you don't have to make the adjustment today. You just want to get there within the next year or so. I digress. So international for me was less than 10% after the 2008 real estate crash, market debacle, near bank collapse, Lehman Brothers, and all that other crap. But each year when the U.S. stock market trounced international, I would say, wow, 10% looks like too small of a percentage, and I'd go to 12 or 15 or 18 or 20 year after year. This is not me going or within the calendar year, but it's been 14 years. And during those 14 years, my plan, my ratio, my split has gone from 10% or less international to where I'm now 30% or more That didn't happen at a moment in time. That has happened over 14 years. And so now I'm 30% or more. I'm actually more like 35%, up to 35%. And part of that increase, specifically within the last year, has been the fact that the dollar has gained a lot of strength in the world, which, funny thing, makes your international investments do less well. When you buy bond index funds, international bond index funds, you want to make sure that they are hedged against currency fluctuations, and Vanguard bond index funds are. When you buy stocks, the volatility within stocks are often big enough that it's not necessarily valuable enough to do hedging against market currency fluctuations. And other companies may have different positions, and you might want to know whether they do this or don't do this. My understanding, and I did have this wrong several years ago, my understanding from watching Vanguard videos and a couple of very smart listeners, because I do have some of the smartest listeners in the world, U.S. or Vanguard international index funds, stock index funds, are not hedged against currency fluctuations. So when the U.S. dollar is gaining strength, your international investments may look like they're doing worse than they are relative to the currencies that they are performing within. On the other hand, if we are at a time, and I think we are, where the U.S. dollar has gained significant strength, for example, the dollar and the euro are pretty close to equal, pretty close to parity. A dollar is a euro, which makes traveling to Europe delightfully enjoyable as far as the price of paying for things. The problem of COVID still exists, but from a currency standpoint, it's fantastic. The first time we went to Italy, you needed $1.50 to buy €1. So when you would have a €10 meal, you were paying $15. Whether you realized it or not, you were out more money than maybe you thought. But now when you have a €10 meal, you're out $10. So it's cheaper for Americans to travel now. Generally speaking, there may be some countries that are exceptions, but that's because of the strength of the dollar. If the dollar goes back to a more normal balance in relationship to other currencies, i.e., it becomes weaker than what it is now, and let's say it becomes 5 or 10% weaker, your international investments may make 5 or 10% compared to the US dollar simply because of currency fluctuations. It's a little bit of a currency gamble. It's a little bit of diversification. Another thing that is currently the situation, in general, the average price to earnings ratio of stocks in the United States is higher than internationally as a rule. If you think that's because American companies are just smarter and better and USA, well then maybe don't put so much in international. Generally speaking, again, over long periods of time, those numbers are equal. So U.S. stock prices seem to be a little richer than international stock prices. The dollar seems to be a little stronger than it is historically. And the international funds in the last 14 years, the last couple of years not been so bad, but the last 14 years in total dramatically underperformed U.S. performance. So those are things that nudge me towards more international as a portion of your stock portfolio. And again, you have to do the bond part first. If you're 25, no bonds. If you're close to or in retirement, you might want 30, 40, 50% bonds. Again, I calculate it a different way, and that was in a previous episode, so I'm not going to rehash that. And I cannot believe that I've talked almost 30 minutes on something without giving you any specific funds to think about. So I am going to wrap up, but this is part 4. Part 5 will be some of the funds that I use when I do international investing. You don't have to use those funds. You don't have to get this carried away. And if you have a smaller portfolio, you honestly might be able to get away with just putting your money in the Vanguard Total International Stock Fund, and you're done. If you have a larger portfolio, 1 million plus, I use 6 different funds in the international arena at Vanguard. they have some overlap. They're not as clean as the funds I use for the U.S. stock market. But the next segment will be the funds that I use for international stocks. And then the sixth and final segment will be the funds and some of the rationale of what I use and why I use them for the U.S. stock market. So hopefully that made sense. Again, my email, Phil@Polaris Financial Planning. If I've confused you, if I've said something wrong, because it happens, I make mistakes just like everybody else, let me know. But I'll wrap up this segment and we'll go on with the rest of the show.
What did this person who made this world intend it for? And this is the point where you think, well, it fits me very well. You know, the caves and the forests and the stream and the mammoths. He must have made it for me. I mean, there's no other conclusion you can come to. And it's rather like a puddle waking up one morning. I know they don't normally do this, but allow me, I'm a science fiction writer. A puddle wakes up one morning and thinks, this is a very interesting world I find myself in. It fits me very neatly. In fact, it fits me so neatly, I mean, really precise, isn't it? It must have been made to have me in it. And the sun rises, and he's continuing to narrate the story about this hole being made to have him in it. And the sun rises, and gradually the puddle is shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. And by the time the puddle ceases to exist, it's still thinking, it's still trapped in this idea that the hole was there for it. And if we think the world is here for us, we will continue to destroy it in the way that we've been destroying it.
The Phil Ferguson Show is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Nothing said on the show should be interpreted as personalized investment advice. Investments should be based on your personal situation, and you, of course, should consult with your financial advisor or tax professional before taking any actions. I am so delighted that you've stuck around. Thank you very much for listening to The Phil Ferguson Show. I appreciate it very much. If you want, go to a platform and give me a 5-star review. Very important, because every once in a while I run into somebody and I tell them they have a podcast, and they're like, oh, everybody has a podcast. And they go to a site that has reviews, like iTunes, or I guess Apple Podcast now, or Stitcher, and they pull up and they go, oh my God, you have hundreds and hundreds of reviews that are 5 stars. It's like almost all 5 stars. Thank you. Thank you for that very much. And it gives them the impression it's a real show. So that's kind of nice. But if you can do that, that's great. Another thing you can do is share the show with your friends. Tell them to go check it out. Tell them to come to learn about investments, and maybe they can learn about religion while they're here. Or you can tell them to come here for religion and or politics, and they can learn about investments while they're here. Whatever works. Whatever works. It's just the shtick that I do, and generally have fun with it. Another topic, random inserted topic, and this is, I'm just going to use my platform here to insert some personal stuff. Anyone who follows me on Facebook has probably already seen my older brother has passed away. He was 61. I'm 55. So 61 now seems like a very young age to me. It is a little spooky, because one could think, well, if he can die at 61, that means I've got 6 years. Hopefully, fingers crossed, I've got much, much longer than that. Both of my parents died at 81, and 81 sounds a lot better than 61. Just saying. Now, he has had a lifelong problem with mental illness, weight issues. He developed diabetes, which I'm dancing with in and out of pre-diabetes, depending on how much I weigh at the time I get my blood test done. Something for me to work on, but he was not successful at keeping his weight down. Could not resist sugar, and things just went poorly for him recently. He had, oh my God, I'm gonna congestive heart failure. Yeah, congestive heart failure within the last year. Had another, I guess, small heart attack. That doesn't sound like anything anyone wants, small heart attack. And at a recent visit, was told he might have had even a couple small ones in between. So on August 2nd, I got a call that no one wants from someone who is an investigator for the Kankakee County Coroner's Office to let me know that they had found my brother dead in his apartment. And for those who didn't know, he lived in Section 8, and that's rough. That's some rough shit. I've talked about briefly stories that, where I've mentioned someone in my family that didn't have funds and didn't have resources and or the ability to make money. That was my older brother. I often went and helped him the best that I could, and that's why I learned so much about bed bugs. If you remember, a couple years ago I did a story on bed bugs. Go check that out if you have them. I figured out how to get rid of them. Well, at least conceptually, but because of where he lived and sometimes his inability to take care of himself, they never really fully went away. But he struggled. He often did not fit in this world. It wasn't built for someone like him. And I did what I could. Of course, now there is the possible reflection and or guilt that I could have done more. I should have done more. But, we are where we are, and my brother died. My brother passed away. And so I'm dealing with some of that with the help of my wife. Thank you, Robin. I could not have done this without her assistance. We have planned a funeral service and a burial, and that's going to be something to go through, and she's very good at doing that. And the unfortunate thing for both my wife and I, apparently we are destined to be involved with these cases. I think we've helped with this kind of stuff 5 or 6 times already. So yay us. But we've got that coming up. Of course, I'm still in the transition of moving to Florida. I did drive my Chevy Bolt EV from Chicago to Florida, and I'm going to do a whole segment on how that went and the pros and cons of doing that. But it can be done, almost 1,200 miles in a slow-charging electric car. But I guess that's it for now. I'm just going to wrap up, and hopefully, give or take in a week or so, I'll come back with another fun show and with information on part 5 of the Polaris Plan. Until then, talk to you another time. Ciao.
Working Christian style. Christian style. We are disciples of Christ and we aren't afraid to show it. We love Jesus Christ and we want the world to know it. The Great Commission tells us to go into the land, meeting people on the street and offering up a hand. Out here in the world,
buying people coffee.
Out here in the world,
shoveling people's walkways.
Out here in the world,
watching kids for date night.
Out here in the world,
gonna make it right.
Showing kindness, so important to me, hey, and to you, hey. It shows the world that Jesus loved them, and that He died for you and me. And when we share the love of Christ, oh yes, we share the love of Christ. We are free, 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 free.
Working Christian style.
Christian style. Work. Working Christian style. Christian style. Work. Working Christian style. Hey, there's a lady. Work. Working Christian style. Hey, let's help that lady. Work, 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 working Christian style.
Whether setting up tables or greeting at the door, helping out in kids' church, scraping gum up off the floor.
We're helping out at Christmas, making lots of Christmas hampers. We fill them up with turkey bread and lots of babies' Pampers.
We'd love to help a friend in need by offering up a meal. It's all about showing all that God's love is real.
We're helping out a single mom by taking out her son so she can go shopping or get her nails done. Showing kindness, so important to me, hey, and to you, hey. It shows the world that Jesus loved them and that he died for you and me. And when we share the love of Christ, oh yes, we share the love of Christ, we are free, 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 free.
Working Christian style.
Christian style. Work, work, work. Working Christian style. Christian style. Work, 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 work. Working Christian style. Hey, there's a lady. Work, 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 work. Working Christian style. Hey, let's help that lady. Work, 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 work. Working Christian style.
Showing acts of kindness is who we're meant to be. So now you see evangelism ain't so scary.
Now you see it's easy. Get out and get it done. Share the love of Christ. It's your turn. Pass it on.
Working Christian style. Hey, there's a lady. Work, 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 work. Working Christian style. Hey, it's that same lady. Work, 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 work. Working Christian style. Working Christian style.